we're talking about old cemeteries or any cemeteries, our target audience, the people we should be serving, are the families of the interred. And so I try to always think, before I do anything or propose any outrageous event in a cemetery, what would the family of one of these people here, if the elderly widow walks up to visit Papa, what would she think of what I'm doing? And if she wouldn't be proud of it, I try not to do it. Today I'll introduce you to these cemeteries and tell you a little bit about their history. Sadly, much of the history of the people buried in these places is lost, at least to me. I'm not a great researcher. But perhaps not irretrievably, a new generation of researchers with better tools is gradually discovering the joy of uncovering the history buried in our historic cemeteries. I'll mix in local history and some cemetery lore today, whenever I feel like it. And Placerville is a really interesting place, and the cemeteries are way cool. So let's get to it. Shaking hands, lots of hands in Victorian tombstones. Very common Victorian symbol. And many of those hands are the hands of God. They're often reaching up. Sometimes they're reaching down, pulling the person into heaven or reaching up. This is a husband and wife, though, and you can tell by the frilly collars and the presence of a wedding ring. The size and condition of these markers is amazing. Again, Mary, one of the people in the congregation here, has brought her friends in the church out here with Dawn dish soap and done this. We do it with far more expensive biological cleaner that costs $60 a gallon. She comes out here with Dawn dish soap and makes me look bad. Thanks a lot, Mary. But to me, it's so validating that they're doing it. Nobody ever did this kind of stuff before. And the reason it's important to clean these up is the crud that you don't see covering these, A, disguises them so you can't read them, and B, it's lichen, which is very cool in and of itself, but it eats the darn stone, and it will shorten the lifespan of them significantly. So that's why we want to get it off. You don't have to do it all the time, just once every couple of decades. Look at this one. Look at this detail, this Gothic detail here. Now in this era, these were hand carved. And we're going to talk about more of this elsewhere. But you'll see signatures, and here's good old Boyne. You can count on him to get his name out there. This is his little calling card down here. This is the guy that carved all this. Okay? And so a bunch of technology happens over the years. They get steam-powered grinders and stuff, but a fair amount of this is a guy with a hammer and a chisel from the old country that couldn't make it as a gold miner. And so Boyne is one of them. He's not one of the original big three. We'll see more evidence of them elsewhere. This is a woman at the well, a biblical symbol. This is she's a Samaritan. She's at the well at the wrong time of the day, which is horrible. She's not even supposed to be drinking from the same well as the other ones. She's a shunned person. And Jesus welcomes her to the well. So it's a metaphor for his love. Until recently, I thought there was only one instance of this symbol. It's a very rare symbol. I only knew of one of them in the county, and used to always say there's only one. And then I saw this. So that's a well, that's the woman. I don't see Jesus in the picture, but there's always the willow. And here we have another signature. And who do we have down here? Divine, who is one of the big three that we'll talk about more at some other cemetery. Beautiful thing. Look at the condition of the stone. It's in good shape. We're going to see a lot that aren't. There's two kinds of stones real prominent in El Dorado County cemeteries. This is marble. It doesn't look like the stuff on your countertop, but it is. It's marble, and it's soft, and it doesn't last forever. A lot of the work we do, pretty much, I try to make it almost all the work we do, but people keep insisting on cleaning the granite headstones. They're like titanium. they're going to last forever. They're 10 times stronger than this old marble. This stuff is fragile, very absorbent. It soaks up moisture, and prone to the lichen. Different lichen lives on the granite, but the marble came in all different qualities. We'll see headstones that look like they are literally melting, like somebody has dumped acid on them. That's what happens to the low quality marble over time. And so especially these ones that are high quality, I mean, you can see the details in the fonts are still perfect from 1865. That's really good marble. And we'll also talk about the origins of some of that marble. Early on, it was all coming from Italy and Vermont, a long way away at great expense. And right here in El Dorado County, we ended up having the first marble quarry in California at a place called Indian Diggings. This cemetery was actually 3 different cemeteries. One was called the Pioneer Cemetery, and it was under that parking lot. Most, but not all the graves, were moved into here. There are people that say they were just randomly placed, that there was no remains moved, just the headstones. Who knows? Another much lesser known cemetery was on Bedford. It was called the Log Cabin Ravine Cemetery, and its people came up here as well.
Do you know why they were moved?
No, not directly, but the city mandated it. They were trying to wrestle some control into the situation, and they had to make a bunch. Basically, government ignores cemeteries until they can't, and so the conditions at Old City Cemetery, which is our last stop today, were so abysmal that they couldn't ignore them anymore, and they had to do something. And so what they did is try to consolidate all the local burials that weren't pauper burials into this and Old City Cemetery. The pauper burials would go to a place we're going to visit in about 40 minutes called the County Hospital or Pestilence House Cemetery, which is a disgrace to everyone who lives in El Dorado County, because there's nothing there. There's no demarcation, no protection, no recognition whatsoever of up to 700 people buried. 700. I mean, there's not 300 here. So twice plus size on a hillside above the senior center. You see some broken headstones. In the simple cases where all the pieces are there, those can be epoxied back together with the right stuff. Fortunately, on the East Coast, in a town like this, there'd be 3 competing headstone repair companies. They're way into it there. And so you can get all these great supplies. It's all very competitive, and seminars and workshops and all this stuff. West of the Mississippi, nothing. We just ignore them still. So hopefully I can get somebody to help these guys to get some of the ones that can be fixed. In the interim, at some point, probably maybe 30, 50 years ago, they took the broken ones and just took the top half and cemented it in the ground, which you really hate to see, because there's all sorts. You destroyed the cultural significance. What's the word, Melinda? Architectural, the significance. And not to mention, you covered up a lot of the information on the headstone. So, and it can't easily be undone. One of my mentors, Melinda, back there in the back row somewhere, taught me was that when you're doing restoration work, you try not to do anything that can't be undone. So, whenever possible, when we're planting these things, we don't even use concrete. We use road base, which you can compact and make real firm. And it's an easy fix. If a better material comes out, some miracle goo that you stick in the ground that's perfect for headstones in 50 years, you just pop them out and put the goo in there and drop the new headstone in. This, I think, was actually the boundary. The Pioneer Cemetery came over here. There was a road called Cemetery Road that came up here from Cedar Ravine. There's a couple interesting ones there on the other side of the road. What's that? Right. Okay, anybody that needs a ride. What's the best way?
We're going to take Angela.
there's a great book. I've already recommended it twice today, but Placerville Then and Now. It gets reprinted every 20 years, but the most recent version is available at the museums and also downtown at the news company. It takes what's on the ground today and then also shows what was there then. And so it really, history, connections, it really helps build those connections. So this is Uppertown Cemetery. For those of you that don't know, that Uppertown was like a separate place. Now we think of this as all just Placerville, but it was a separate place with a separate identity. Somebody told me there was actually a bus that ran between Placerville and Uppertown at one point in time. The prominent family here were Crockers. Michelle, my cheat sheet, please. And the Crockers are no relation to the big four Crockers that built the railroad, but the railroad definitely affected Uppertown in that it crushed it, basically. When we didn't get the Transcontinental Railroad through Placerville, it destroyed our local economy and created the problems I alluded to back in the chapel, where the city ceased to exist. But the Crockers were especially hit hard because they had a huge hardware store right on Broadway, basically right where the Mosquito Overpass is today. On the other side of the freeway, there's a kind of a little used parking lot there across from a Thai restaurant today. But that's where the Crocker Brothers hardware store was. And man, were they in the driver's seat when the Comstock load happened. There was still no way to get supplies to the Comstock, so everything came through Placerville on wagons, and all those wagons went right by their store. So there should be a picture of the Crocker store and Bowman House, artfully put there at 2 a.m. by yours truly last night. And then even a picture of early Broadway in the early 1900s right down here on the back. There's two prominent families that keep an eye on this place and clean it up. One is Brian here, who we've already met. The other one is the multi-generational Wigglesworth, great word, Wigglesworth family that lives right down at the end of this road. They've been here since the picture on page 2 was taken. Their house is on the left there, and I started to say, or maybe, I don't know if I edited it out at 2:30 a.m. last night, but I started to say, see if you can recognize the house today, but I think it's too far, because the road in the picture on page 2, that's like Broadway, and that's Carson that turns left there around that little house, the Wigglesworth house. So they probably either moved the house or bought a new one over here. But anyway, my mentors, I'll mention them a few times because they really influenced the way I look at things. They spoke very, very highly of the Wigglesworths. The Wigglesworth family were an inspiration, and it helped mentor them. And so I'm still talking nice about them. Let's just pound through this since I'm already here. You can get at this cemetery from the other side, from the bottom, and you can even see it. If you know where to look when you're driving east on the freeway, you can see this place. But there's a stairway, a concrete stairway that goes down to Mosquito Road, right down there. And it's a nice walk for, you see power walkers doing it. I wanted to bring you in this side because I don't want you to incur the steepness. This is owned by the city of Placerville. It's not an open, you can't buy a plot here, but you still couldn't be buried here if your family already has a legacy plot here. In cemetery parlance, those are called pre-needs. They're always, cemeteries are always trying to sell pre-needs plots in advance so they can get the money now and give you the plot later. Cemetery founded 1850. There's a bunch of facts here right on this nice sign. 200 known burials. The first, some Reverend Amariah Kalak. The land was donated by the Crockers. All right. Oh yeah, Crocker's trip west. These guys getting here was really an adventure. So by the time he comes in 51, you can go across Panama. But the problem is getting a lift from the Pacific coast up to Sacramento. there's not enough boats coming up, and so a lot of people and a lot of disease happened on that Panama coast, waiting to get on any kind of ship you can get on to get up here. That happened to the founding Crocker, which was William, I think, Benjamin Crocker. Basically, the boat's so bad, disease is breaking out all over. People are dying right and left. They're throwing them overboard. It breaks down completely. They're adrift. It's like, this is hell. It's never going to end. They, one way or another, drift or get dragged into San Diego. He has to recuperate for a long time and doesn't get up here until the next year. And he finds Sacramento absolutely devastated by the floods of 1851. So he gets here in 52. He's penniless and desperate. And he's walking down Main Street, Placerville, and hears the voice of an old friend in a bar. And he goes in, and it's somebody he knows that he worked with in the lead mines in Wisconsin. And this guy gives him his start. Man, what a journey. And I give you one story of a guy. You got no, it's just sensational, so I put it in here because I'm not above cheap sensation. Suicide was much more common in this pre-safety net era. People got older, they got ill, life was miserable, they saw no end in sight, they just killed themselves. Well, this guy at age 42 lit a stick of dynamite and placed his head on it. And removed the back half of his skull, and he was buried here. So I guess I can get a little snarky, but we should be grateful that these cemeteries aren't completely locked up. In a lot of places with no maintenance, that's what happens. So come on down here, take it easy. I'm going to stand here and make sure everybody gets through. The leaves are not as slippery as they look, but there was so many branches of these local families. I thought for sure, there's Wilkinsons, there's Sweeneys.
There's got to be some connection, you think?
Yeah, well, I did extensive research as far as going one level in and find a grave and didn't see any. So.
Okay. Wow, 97 years old.
So these are the Crocker graves here. They're not fancy. Uppertown was a blue-collar place. I'm always impressed that these places are in any shape whatsoever. Back in the ugly pre-internet era, when kids didn't have anything to do but drink beer and destroy things, places like this were really abused. And I don't know, I never saw it back then. I know that a lot of headstones were destroyed and a lot were stolen, but I'm not unhappy with the way this looks. And I like to make out like we're the only ones fixing headstones, and we may be the only ones using super expensive materials to do it, but doing a little research on Find a Grave, there's pictures of them broken and pictures of them put back together, and we didn't do the putting back together, so there's other people out there doing stuff. Sometimes it's just folks like Brian in the neighborhood, and sometimes it's people that are a taphophile. You guys know what a taphophile is, don't you? Don't you? Go ahead, admit it. You don't know what that word means. A taphophile, you are probably one, and you don't even know it. A taphophile is somebody with my definition, a peculiar fondness for old cemeteries. It's a real word. And if you got it bad, you're a taphophiliac, which requires a certain 12-step program. Haha. But taphophile is real, and for people like me, you know, the first time I walked into a Placerville Cemetery, which is 2 stops from now, I was just happy. I was fascinated. I took all the pictures that would fit on my little SIM card, and never looked back. Starting, you know, in the earliest part of the gold rush through the mid-49, the nearest hospital is San Francisco. If you need a hospital, you got to get all the way to San Francisco, and back then, that's a long way. And it might require boats. 49, of course, the immigrants arrive in force. Lots of doctors. You had to be fairly well off to pull this off, especially early on. It took a lot of money and resources. So a lot of doctors show up here thinking they're going to get rich mining and end up doctoring. But we got 4 doctors here in 49, but care is expensive, $16 a day. Board and lodging for a sick person, $20 to $30 a day. Nonetheless, the death rate is, quote, appallingly high. It didn't help that we had a really wet 1850, and so all these soggy, haggard immigrants full of disease show up and die. It was ugly. I'm going to mention some specific names. You know, when we say people's names, it's a way of recognizing their service and not forgetting them. 2 doctors, Clark and Harvey, in 1850 start lobbying for a county hospital. We become a state in 1850, right? Somebody help? Yeah, thank you. County in 55, finally the county funds a hospital in the Broadway house, and as I recall, they only did it because they were having to foot the bill for taking people to San Francisco. But the hospital over there on Broadway House gets a great reputation. It's in a 57 report to the Board of Supervisors, I just should have quoted the doctor, I think it's Harvey, that says, the insane have been accorded asylum, the deaf, dumb, blind, indigent become inmates of the county hospital. This class of cases have received at our hands that consideration due to their unfortunate condition, although the terms of our contract do not oblige us to take care and maintain them. I might have butchered that a little bit, but what it means is they were taking care of the sick people and the mentally ill people too. And it's weird that here in this conservative county, we had early socialized medicine. That's essentially what it was. 61, another famous doctor, Titus, takes over. He's a former state senator. He sponsors state legislation that provides funding to counties for outpatient care. 62, the county dedicates 8 acres on Quartz Hill for a hospital, which includes a main hospital, outpatient clinic, a pest house, which is an isolation ward for people with infectious diseases, although it turns into like an old folks home later in its life, residences, an orchard over there, and gardens, I don't know where, and within a few years, a cemetery right behind me. Because they were banned from using the other cemeteries because the cemeteries were filling up, and these people come to these places and die more often than normal people, and they didn't want the existing cemeteries filled up with these people. 1898, the early doctor with the best name, Dr. Noble Mountain, takes over and reports, quote, in addition to the steadily increasing rate of patients injured in mining accidents due to the development of deep mining, the hospital handled the seemingly chronic problem treatment of teenage boys who wounded themselves while practicing the quick draw. Thought that was funny. In 1910, all the way through the 1950s, a sanatorium, and in those days, I think that just was a generic term for hospital, opens over on Coloma Road, which before the freeway, Highway 49 went more or less straight through Placerville there. It didn't jog right to where it does today. But over there on Coloma Road, right across from Church of Our Savior, if that's any help, there was the sanatorium, and it serves as a public birthing and pediatric center. 1912, the county burns to the ground for the first time. It cost a whopping $13,000 to rebuild it. It burns again in 34. The Pest house burns and is not rebuilt. There's not a lot of talk about the Pest house in this era. There's a few newspaper stories. Some are glowing, some are horrible. Conditions vary from year to year depending on funding. In 46, which is when I think this parking lot got expanded, a new public hospital is built and equipped for $345,000. Early on, like, I don't know, 15% of the patients were indigent. After 46, charity cases become the bulk of admissions in the main hospital. Administrators are proud that the same high quality of care and concern are maintained. So that structure, I mean, you can still go in there. In the crafts room, those big, super sturdy tables, guess what used to be happening there? You know, go in and tell the quilters sometime that this is where they sawed off the legs. They love that. So this place is interesting. The bathrooms at the end of the aisles have these huge tubs, and then you read a little bit about the history of hydrotherapy, which they forced on a lot of people, thinking it would cure them whether they liked it or not. And those are clearly hydrotherapy tubs. So anyway, the county marshal opens in 59, and all this should quiet down, but it doesn't. Instead, this is all remodeled and a new building added for $500,000. And now they outsource, and actually it's not until 72 they outsource it to some outfit called the Universal Medical Systems, who loses their license 2 years later and the place closes. So, because now Marshall's thriving and taking care of business. So that's the county hospital history in a nutshell. The cemetery, and all this hospital talk, there's very little mention of the cemetery. However, researchers found hospital and archive records that indicate at least 430 burials on the grounds between 1862 and 1934. The number is likely much higher. This all came to light when residential development was repeatedly proposed up there, and the road Robin Court we just drove on was going to be the primary access, and so the applicants all relied, for all these projects, relied on a 1987 report by Dana Supernowitz. Melinda, where are you? All right, he's a good friend of Melinda. Which concluded that there were likely hundreds of burials on the site, but identified just 11 potential burial sites, and concluded that the cemetery had, quote, little or no architectural value, close quote. He recommended the expansion of Robin Court to access the proposed project. That report led to the city planning department recommending approval of the Quartz Mountain Estates project above the cemetery. But things happened, the project languished. For 2 decades, during which time the county acquires this property to become the health services and senior center that it is today, and commissions a ground-penetrating radar study in 2003, which found firm evidence of at least 170 burials on this hillside. Workers had previously stumbled on graves while expanding the parking lot, and grave stake number 317 was found all the way down on Tunnel Street, implying that it went all the way down there. Here's the most damning thing. A total of 814 deaths occurred at the county hospital. Researchers could find only 21 interred elsewhere. That's between 62 and 23. When yet another proposal for Quartz Hill landed on County Director Tom Celio's desk in 2009, he didn't mince words. He declared the 87 Supernowitz report to be flawed, referencing the subsequent research which indicated far more burials, and argued that there were likely many more beneath the parking lot and structures. He strongly recommended that any future project should spare no expense to protect, document, and mitigate the potential damage to the cemetery. And nothing ever happened. Although they subdivided it. There's like little cul-de-sacs and street names, cute street names up there. The cemetery itself is, what's left of it, is roughly 3 acres right here. The original cemetery is 3 acres. It's bounded by Tunnel Street, Robin Court, an old irrigation ditch, which is that ridge that you see right there, and a drainage culvert, which is most of the way down this way. And the orchard was on the other side of that. Earlier burials would have been as far from the orchard as possible, which would place the oldest burials at the northeast corner of the hill, just below the ditch. I've spent too many hours of my life stomping around up there trying to find these tiny little metal stakes that they put in not until like the 1910s to mark these indigent burials. And originally found like 4, that was 10 years ago, and as of last week, 1. And I can point you to it. Anybody that wants to hike, there's a trail right there, and 50 feet above that posted no trespassing sign right there, on the right, I placed a nice white granite rock, and about 4 feet to the right of that, you will see a grave stake number 42 sticking up about that far out of the ground. What's interesting about these grave stakes is they recycled old wagon tires, the steel thing that went around the wood, and so you can tell that because one side is rounded. Yeah, and so they stamped these numbers on them, and somewhere, I assume, in some record someplace, there's a list of numbers and names. I'm not sure. There's no guarantee to that. Okay. Researchers heard all sorts of stories, perhaps exaggerated, of the workers on this parking lot and those structures being inoculated, having to burn their clothes when they would continue to find body parts and coffin parts. There were certainly lots of burials of victims of communicable diseases such as smallpox, cholera, tuberculosis, diphtheria, and never any mention of any portion of the cemetery set aside for those burials, which would have been the practice of the day, but does not appear to have been done here. Originally, the graves were just marked with wooden markers. Of course, those burned off during fires early on. Then they put slate up there, and interestingly, when I was stomping around in 2017 looking for these little stakes, I kept finding these weird, out-of-place, angled pieces of slate at a funny angle, and I think those were probably some old grave markers. What we need is a sign right here that explains all this. A big sign. We've got one in Mormon Island Cemetery that attempts to do that, and an organization dedicated to the preservation, restoration, and celebration of cemeteries should undertake that project. Right from the start, I loved the statuary grave markers and all the religious symbology on the Catholic headstones. These days I love it because this is what a normal, well-managed private cemetery should look like. You know, there's an area where all the headstones are flat because they cut the grass. Yes, I said that. They cut the grass. There is grass and they cut it. That's progress. The cemeteries I spend my time in are not orderly places. There is order in this universe. Someone's in charge. This isn't the first St. Patrick's Church cemetery, so there's a darker side of the story. We'll drive by it later. It was behind the Catholic Church on Sacramento Street, the final resting place for a century of Placerville's Catholic faithful from 1851 through 1952. In 1963, I believe, Melinda, correct me if you know any better, I believe that many of the graves were moved here because there's graves here that date prior to that. The church needed space to expand, but nearly 100 of the graves were not moved. The headstones were bulldozed and those graves were covered by the new church building. So you might ask, can they do that? And the answer is yes, they can. It's their cemetery, and they are a religious organization. Religious organizations and fraternal organizations have always been very dominant in the cemetery business. The fraternal organizations much less so now because they're just less dominant now. But especially religious organizations can do what they want. Apparently this was done with the permission of the families they could find. Or perhaps these were the families they couldn't find. I'm not sure. Other than a few scathing letters to the editor in the subsequent weeks, the action seems to have passed without much fuss. The parish priest, Father Cornelius O'Connor, said at the time, "We feel, quote, we feel this is a dignified approach to the problem we had to face." So what is now the activity building, I think the last time we were there, Michelle, it was an Empty Bowls event, lovely event. There's 100 people down there. And they put a nice granite marker, it's on page 1 of my handout, with the names of the people. And there's pretty familiar names there. It seems like you could find the Sigwarts and the Baileys, and I recognize a lot of the names from my own reading and history. Sweeney's, I don't know. I confess I've never contacted the management of this well-run cemetery to ask exactly how and why this decision was made. Perhaps that's because my mentors in this work held the church in great disdain for the decision. That's the history of the cemetery. Wherever it's under trees, it's worse. The lichen likes being under trees. Out at Greenwood, which is a beautiful cemetery, if you ever get a chance to go out there, there is weird stuff 1.5 inches thick growing on those headstones. I don't even know what it is. We actually have a work party scheduled out there for the summer, so we're going to go out and find out. And the Historical Society is planning, it's probably not going to be this year, but next, Victorian champagne brunch in Greenwood, because it's heavily shaded. It's a beautiful cemetery, very historic and heavily shaded. Like this one, but without all the management. It's got above ground mausoleum, it's got infrastructure, it's got stuff that needs support from the county. Nothing had been done here for a long, long time. There was a lot of broken headstones laying all over the place. Many of them were subterranean. This is a year later, this is where we're at. Unbeknownst to me and Brian at that time, the Emblem Club, which there's a plaque that they put the original flagpole here back in '88. They replaced it this year as part of a grand cemetery adoption. When I went to the city and said, "Hey, you okay with us fixing your headstones?" They didn't know what to do with all the broken headstones. They were doing landscaping and flagpole replacement and bench building and all this other stuff. And they're going to do fences and trees now. Get to that in a minute. But it was a marriage made in heaven. We celebrated it on stage 3 at Save the Graves last October. I did a presentation that's basically the content of your handout. And I had the lady that was in charge of the committee. The Emblem Club, by the way, they're like the Ladies Auxiliary of the Elks. They're independent, but they're affiliated with the Elks. And they're very fraternal. I mean, they have got rules, and you got to dress a certain way and go to a certain thing, and, you know, funny, but they get a lot of stuff done, and their people show up and work hard. I love the Emblem Club. And it turns out, you know, they were central. When I glossed over all that history of the restoration of that chapel at the beginning of this day, they were in the middle of that too back then. So, and they have, like all the fraternals, they've ebbed and flowed in terms of action and stuff, and they've come back up. What's weird is the male-based fraternals are still sort of, they're trying to come back. The Oddfellows are doing some. The Masons, I don't hear too much about. But the women-based fraternals, the DAR, got so big in Placerville, they split off and founded a new one in El Dorado Hills, Folsom, the Charlotte Parkhurst chapter. They're doing all kinds of stuff. Lots of cemetery. We work with them a lot, too. But this is one of Placerville's oldest, most historic, and most tormented cemeteries. For many years, this important cultural resource was a disgrace. Vandalized, overgrown, trash-strewn. The cemetery has a long history of abuse. There's newspaper stories going back to the early 1850s about how terrible things are up here. As far back as the 1860s, conditions are so bad that local fraternals form Union Cemetery and move their families from here over there. Numerous restorations and cleanups are conducted over the years, but lacking long-term stewardship, the cemetery always returns to dereliction. In recent years, the homeless situation, of course, exacerbates the problems. All that changed when the Emblem Club shows up in 2023 and adopts it. A few liability release forms later, they get the green light. I already told you how we kind of stumbled into them. Marriage made in heaven. So a year ago, we had a headstone cleaning party out here and showed them how to clean headstones, and oh, they took right to it and go at it. It's not hard. While we were out there, I told one of the Emblem husbands that, you know, if you poke around out here, you'll find headstones in the ground. They might have been there a century or more. And the guy found one. He found one, and I'll show it to you. It's right here. I'm looking at it right now. And oh my God, he was just lit up. He was so excited. So let's take a look at it. Brian is a veteran, and he started out doing his work exclusively on veteran markers. So this one was completely underground. We never did recover all the pieces. So this was his first attempt at using filler to fill a gap. And the lettering still needs a little work. But you can see that everything's clean, and you'll see a lot of repairs. So he's probably fixed, I would say, a couple dozen. And of course, like every place, this is a fraction of the headstones that are here. This place has been really vandalized. I remember retrieving headstones from the fence where somebody got one as far as the fence and couldn't get it over the fence and dropped it and left it. And I dragged it back into the middle of the cemetery. Obviously, we're not done. I've got to recruit somebody with lifting equipment to get this one up into place. You can see it's clean already, gorgeous. By the way, I mentioned earlier that first marble quarried in California was from Indian Diggins. Here's how you tell Indian Diggins marble, right here. Blue veining. This was considered the apex. This was really beautiful and highly sought after for like 10 years, and then it became passé and everybody wanted the virgin white stuff out of Colombia. So we had our 10 years. But the marble quarry continued to work way out in the woods. You basically drive to Elmo Ranch, turn right, and drive another 45 minutes on horrible roads. And we go out there. I took a tour out there. You can't even get all the way there. You have to walk the last several hundred feet. But it's really interesting because they were way out there, and there's just a bunch of these big things. But I met some guys with lifting equipment. We did that arch you drove under. That was a Save the Graves project. And the iron workers and their buddies with big lifting stuff, they were really into it. And I'm pretty confident I can get somebody to help me lift this back up here when things dry out. If not, we've got a new board member named Rory Deerkamp, who has a brother-in-law with a construction company, and he's got one of everything. Here are the Fuller brothers, which were underground. And you can see some of Brian's fine work here. This was broken in pieces underground. And look at it now. Isn't that nice? Here's another one. It's broken. Here we got Fish. Here's Fish, another local stone carver, second generation stone carver. Fish did the plainer things. So Fish would have bought this with the tassels already on it. He would have probably just carved in this stuff. This stuff he probably bought. I now believe that because there's too many headstones that look like this in this era, they were buying them pre-done. More cleaning and repair. The thin ones are particularly challenging. You see these up here. Very difficult. About 30 years ago, the county hired somebody, and I don't know how they ended up in a city cemetery, but they were worried about losing the most historic headstones, and they set them in concrete like this. This is now deemed to be bad practice because the concrete doesn't react well with the marble, and it also collects moisture. I'm less critical. I mean, they did something. They kept it from disappearing and ended up in somebody's garden. Because that's the thing with, when you've got a cemetery in really rough shape where the headstones are laying in pieces, people start picking them up and dragging them off. I mean, this old marble, it's not that heavy. You can put it in the back seat of your car pretty easily. So look at this beautiful thing, signed by Aitken. He's like, you know, the original primary guy. Interesting guy, had 2 thumbs on his right hand.
Well, the headstones buried underground probably saved a lot of them, though, from being stolen and taken away.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're under the ground somewhere, but...
It's actually in the headstone preservation primer that Melinda bought me when I started this work. Here, you need to do it this way. They actually tell you for VA markers and any old marble markers, if you can't do anything with it right now, bury it. Leave it underground. Don't put it in a place where there's a lot of water collecting, but you know, a shallow burial where it's draining is better than leaving it on the surface, because the surface has got a whole series of problems, many of which have 2 legs. So, yeah.
Do you use GPS them when you bury them, or take off?
That's a good idea. I don't know. I've never buried one, but what everybody uses now is find a grave. And so Brian, when he does this work, now this is not a young man, and he loves find a grave. He puts his work on there, posts it on there. So this is an active project, and it's a very interesting grave. I think it's the most culturally significant grave here. So this is the daughter, the son rather, of B. What's B's? F-A-B. We just drove on B Street. And B has a little piece of Placerville history. He was an early shopkeeper, my first generation, and he did this little accomplishment called getting the telegraph to the West Coast while he was here. By doing so, he put the Pony Express out of business, and we haven't forgiven him for that. But he left early on. He had the big house across the street from Union Cemetery, which is called the B. Bennett House. Now it's Wedgwood Weddings. For many years it was the Sequoia Restaurant. That was his house, but it was modest, a regular house when he had it. Judge Bennett, with his big family, moved in there and greatly expanded it into the mansion that it is today after B left town. B went to San Francisco. He was a lawyer, and he became an advocate for the Chinese during a horrible, horrible era of discrimination against Chinese at every level. I mean, this guy was literally the account. I only know all this because some Chinese guy created this huge big blog about he just worships this guy. He was in like 10,000 newspaper stories. I mean, there was whole publications that were just dedicated to trashing all things Chinese. And B was in all their cartoons and just the biggest devil because he was a white man encouraging these people to come here. And he just fought for them relentlessly. Specifically the women that were being sold into sexual slavery. There's all sorts of horrible stuff that he got in front of, and he made a real difference, and they venerated him in China. They just put him on a pedestal. And while he was here, the relatively short time he was here, he had a baby. He was having a baby and it died, and this is the B baby. So I love that history. This fence has been laying on the ground for decades in pieces. The guy that put up that big arch, that led that project, the biker, the metalworker biker, I challenged him to come out here and try to restore this thing, because these old cheap pot metal parts don't weld. But he's trying to put it together. So there you go, guys. You survived.
Thank you.
We didn't lose anybody that we know of, or kill anybody that we know of, and it's 8 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Woo!
That's a first.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. We're headed back to Federated.
Yes. He subsequently moved and rented that place out. But,